Hey everybody, you're going to want to keep your eyes on today's show, and you're not going to want to miss a bit because we're talking about crazy quilts. Waka waka waka, and we're not talking your grandma's crazy quilts. Waka 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 waka.
And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the show, everyone. An audience, thank you for coming today. When we walked in and saw all these quilts, well, they're crazy.
They are waka waka. They really are, but they're different kind of crazy than you would normally see in a crazy quilt. And I'm very excited to welcome to the Quilt Show today, Miss Allie Aller. How are you?
Thank you.
OMG.
Well, first of all, they're diverse. They all have a different personality.
Yes, they do.
All right, so let's get to know you just a little bit before we look at your quilts. Is crazy quilting, has it been your thing through your entire quilting experience?
No, it hasn't. I started quilting in high school and, you know, family wedding quilts and like that. And then I went through the traditional phase that most of us went through and made a lot of bed quilts. And then I started being interested in embroidery purse. And so I did a lot of cutout flower, collage type quilts. And then from there, I went into stained glass quilts, and I did those for probably 5 years, and I'm very interested in revisiting that. And then landscape quilts hit me, and I probably did another 3 or 4 years of landscape quilts, and then I went nuts. I went crazy.
Great. And before we actually find out how that happened, let's just look at the first quilt here.
Okay.
Tell us about it.
That quilt was done in memory of my Uncle Hal, who was a Marine in World War II, and I was very, very close to my uncle. And when he passed away, I made that quilt in memory of him. Everyone called him H, and so that's why the H is in the center. But what I tried to capture in that was the bridge between traditional and very contemporary, because as a man, that's the way he was. He was young at heart always, but he was also a traditional man. So that's what I tried to do.
Well, and when I look at that quilt and I think about crazy quilts in general, oftentimes crazy quilts are just kind of this overall texture, and it's beautiful,
right.
But this one has kind of a structure to it.
Well, it's a medallion quilt
right.
almost, you know?
And I'm so glad you saw that. There's nothing random ever in the crazy quilts that I do. I try and design. I've always got the big picture in mind, and when I'm working, I have stuff up on the wall so that every time I piece something or stitch something, I'm looking at it as a whole. It's not just random.
Wow.
What drew you into crazy quilts specifically?
I would say that it is so improvisational.
Improvisational.
Improv. It's an improv experience.
It's the design decision making that happens every seam, every color choice, every fabric, how you're going to piece it. You are thinking and designing every step of the way, and that keeps it so exciting.
Who taught you all the stitches and all that good stuff?
I learned them myself.
Just research.
I'll tell you what right now. Well, there's a secret we're going to tell you down the road.
Okay.
You know, you have to stick around, Ricky.
I won't go anywhere.
Right, no, I learned by doing.
Okay.
Which is kind of the hard way, because there's so many great resources out there, but I just learned by doing.
I talked to you before the show started about this next quilt because I love the layers, but also the simplicity. Let's talk about it.
Well, that quilt is based on a quilt I saw at a quilt show at an antique dealer, John Sales' booth, and it's a classic pattern, Gothic windows, but I really wanted to make it partly crazy. So I wanted some embellishment, but I didn't want it over the top. I wanted to hold on to that traditional feel. So I was very controlled on this one. I only let myself use blue in the stitching, and I only used one stitch, which was herringbone.
Mm-hmm.
But because of that, the focus is on the different kinds of threads that I used. So in tamping down on some elements, others are brought into focus.
Well, and then I also mentioned that you've got that black crosshatch grid, which has got that wonderful little shape in the block, but it's velvet. Those are black velvets, but there's lots of different black velvets.
The eye will register all of that, and so it will give you a more rich experience viewing it.
And so how did you get these unusual fabrics if, say, you were a traditional quilter?
Well, when my friend's furniture store had a fire and all their fabric had to be condemned for insurance reasons, it was still good.
Was this like upholstery, silk, and all
Yes,
that?
and she was a very high-end fabric buyer. So she brought me in the back of her car 4 giant trash bags full of fabric samples of stuff I'd never heard of. So Dupioni silk or Belgian linen or pre-embroidered fabrics, here they came. And what do I do?
And let's kind of
Crazy
take you
quilting.
down that journey.
Nice.
All right, let's look at this next one.
The next one, again, all those, I call them blanks. There were 16 muslin foundations up on my design wall, and I pieced them as I went to get that circular effect. That's called Crazy for Flowers. And to me, what I remember best about that quilt is I have an online friend who's a very great stitcher, and she had a challenge one summer called 100 Details in 100 Days. Her name is Sharon Boggin, and I set upon myself to every day take whatever seam treatment, combination of stitches, she presented that day and interpreted on my quilts.
Oh, nice.
So 100 of Sharon's seam treatments, my dear friend, are on that quilt.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
And the next one?
Now the next one shows what happens when you become professional late in your career and all of a sudden you don't have time to put a year into a quilt anymore. And so I wanted to find a way to still do crazy work but speed things up. That was one of the motivations. Another was that quilt was commissioned to be in a magazine for the modern quilters, Modern Quilts Unlimited. And so how do you make a modern crazy quilt? It can't be over the top. It's got to have some pretty simple design parameters.
Sure.
And use solids and a lot of machine embroidery on that one. And I loved making it. A different experience, but I still really enjoyed it.
Now, I understand that you live in the Pacific Northwest now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But you came from Michigan?
I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I spent my summers on Lake Michigan, and it's always going to be point A for me.
And this next quilt relates to your life in Michigan.
Yes, it does. That is a quilt of the family cottage on my dad's side of the family, the Bryant family cottage on Lake Michigan, where he grew up as a boy and where I grew up as a young girl, and it's still in the family. And to me, the most beautiful place in the world is the shore of Lake Michigan. Okay. And so...
And this relates to a family story, a family incident?
Yeah, there, in every family there's highs and lows, and we had some real tragedy around that cottage. I had an older brother. I was 4 and he was 5, and he drowned there. And it led to, in any family, when you lose a child, things go it's really hard for people. And my parents didn't survive as a marriage. So I ended up not being able to go back to that cottage because it was in my dad's side of the family. So I made those 2 quilts out of a sense of loss, of missing the place. And that quilt, as I was making it, the very last thing I did was I embroidered my brother's name in the sand. And I didn't even know that quilt was about him until the end.
Wow.
And the reason I wanted to tell you all about it is because when you sit down and do handwork over a period of time, you can really access deep parts of yourself that you might otherwise be too busy to spend any time with.
Right.
And so it was a very healing quilt for me, 45 years later.
Sure.
And then that other quilt.
Right, because you mentioned 2 quilts. The one on the right here is, I don't want to say a companion, but it's also Michigan.
It is. It's when you're in the cottage and you look out at the lake, that's what you see. And now that quilt too was before I was able to go back. There's a very happy ending to this story because I made that quilt out of missing Lake Michigan, and that quilt ended up being in a magazine, and my cousin who owns that cottage saw that quilt in a magazine and said, "God, that looks like Miss Linda." And then she looked and said, "My cousin Allie made that quilt." And we reconnected, and now I go back.
Yay!
That's fabulous. That's great.
Yay!
Yeah.
I love that quilt.
I do.
I love that
Thank you.
quilt. And really, I would love to sit in here and look at that for the next 2 hours. But
I know. And the nice thing is we're looking at all these crazy quilts, wakata, 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 with a new twist. And it just proves that it always evolves and changes.
Yes.
And you're going to show us how to do some of those changes after the break. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. everyone. We're here today with Allie Aller. And Allie, I have to say, you have taken crazy quilting into the 21st century, definitely.
Thank you, thank you.
Now, I know that some of the quilts that we looked at were very kind of contemporary. This one that we're working on has a little bit of a throwback to it, but there's still a lot of thought process.
Yes, there is. This is taken from, I saw an antique quilt that I really loved, and it's the same as that quilt there.
And what did you call that?
That's called Crazy for Plaid, but the pattern of the block is actually called Gothic Windows, if I'm not mistaken. And what I did on this one is I made the block a little bigger, and I decided to use all my wonderful collection of vintage linens for my background block.
Okay, look at this, guys. So here's the block, and this is, describe what's in the background.
This is a scrap of the bottom of a vintage petticoat ruffle that was all hand embroidered with very fine white thread, and it was, you know, it had rust stains, and it was in my bin, and I thought, I'm going to use this. I want to see it and work with it and
You're either going to leave it in a drawer where it'll never be enjoyed, or put it in a project like this.
So,
okay, and what this guy, now when I point to both sides, it's because it's all underneath that strip. So this is
This was printed linen from the 30s, and people would embroider on these, you know, printed guidelines. But whoever bought it decided not to do it, and I ended up buying a whole lot of these vintage linens on eBay. And I just thought it was great to include it as it was.
Sure. All right, and this guy right here.
This was a little table doily type thing, and it was in my family, and my cousin sent one to each of us, and I decided it should be in the quilt.
I'm going to do 3 more. Look at this guy.
Yeah.
Idaho Sugar.
Idaho Sugar. That's part of a feed sack. I love I just love what it evokes, the farm life.
Right. And look at this guy. How many of us have found these old quilt tops that are almost practically unusable?
It was like gossamer. It was so thin, but there was little enough contrast that it sort of reads as a solid, but there's so much history and kind of soul and interest that I just interfaced it and I used it as fabric.
Okay, and I can see it was hand pieced. You can see that. All right, and here's one more. Let's look at this guy.
Okay, now this came from a really wonderful fabric store in Vermont called Delectable Mountain Cloth. If you're ever in Brattleboro, go there. She has the most exquisite collection of fine fabrics, and this jacquard silk is from her store in Vermont.
Okay. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about this quilt before we move forward, all right? I want to just notice, first of all, I'm noticing that you chose for your grid to be all plaid.
Right.
You made an intelligent decision about that. They're all randomly plaid, but they're basically all plaid. Okay, I see this guy's a little bit not plaid, but he fits. All right.
That's because he's repro. No, plaid. I love plaid, and it evokes a feeling of warmth in everyone. We all love plaid, and it just adds to this sort of vintage, cozy, but interesting, hopefully.
So once it was sewn together, tell us what you did on all of these seams, on all of these intersections.
Well, I'm going to show you the back because I want you to see that when the seams, after the blocks are sewn together, I iron them open because that open seam allowance gives me a little bit of extra stability for the machine stitching that I put along the seam.
Right, okay, so that's a machine stitch.
That is a machine stitch. Also, if you'll notice, the colors are pretty controlled here, but I went crazy on my thread work, on my machine work and ribbon work. And so even though it's kind of subdued, it's still kind of crazy too.
All right. Now I want to point out this is a pearl cotton?
Yeah, that is this number 3 pearl cotton that I have first glued into place, and it, you know, you think, well, you've got a couching foot and you could just machine. But I want real control. I want it right up against my edge.
And you're going to show us how to do that.
I am. So I glue it and then I machine zigzag in a clear thread to couch it down.
Excellent. And then you've got the same stitch going all in different threads, but you've then done this outline.
Right. It's called the herringbone stitch. And I think that using the same stitch unifies the quilt. Rather than having all kinds of different things to look at, you've already got that with the fabrics and the plaids and the colors. So let's have a little uniformity in the stitch.
All right, let's talk about these fabrics.
All right. All right, I brought these in to show that you don't need to just use cotton. You can use wool, you can use Aida cloth, This is more of that embroidery that someone started and then gave up.
Right.
But see all the texture and the different weaves and the different fibers.
What have you got here?
Now this was a crocheted piece that, what are you going to do with it? But you can layer it over fabric. I used a real intense quilt basting spray to stick those together. And then I just sew it. My machine will handle it.
Okay.
This is
flimsy.
That's Japanese kimono fabric, but look at how beautiful the weave is.
It is gorgeous. Now, what would you stabilize this as well?
I would stabilize that.
Okay, we'll talk about stabilization. This is another old quilt top?
It's part of that raggedy old quilt top, and yes, I have stabilized it.
Okay, so we're not seeing the full seams here. We're only seeing through. Let's talk about the stabilizer real quick. What are you using?
Okay, I buy this stuff by the bolt. I use it to stabilize
Which one is that?
This one.
All right.
This is the iron-on fusible knit interfacing. And the reason I use it is because if a silk is wiggly, it'll stop it from wiggling. If it's thin, it will give it a little more support while I'm working with it. And it doesn't change the hand of the fabric at all.
Okay, and I can feel that there's the fusy side. Whenever you are actually using this onto the back of one of those fabrics, do you use some sort of a barrier or a pressing sheet or something so the goop of the fusible doesn't go on the iron?
I do. The scratchy side is the glue side. And if once in a while I get the wrong side down, because I'm using a pressure sheet or I'm using release paper from Fusible Web, a barrier, if I hit that thing wrong, it'll stick to the paper and not my iron.
Okay, yeah.
But it will also, you can get your iron hotter because it won't melt it as much.
Okay. Now, what about, this is a different sort of...
Right, now this is paper fusible, and it's used for people who are making shirts, but I've found that it works well as this stuff does too. It's just, it gives the fabric a slightly different hand.
I've used this when I've done t-shirt quilts to stabilize the t-shirts. Yeah.
Sure.
All right, so now let's make the block.
Okay,
Can we do that?
Let's make the block.
I've got some of my pieces down here.
You've got yours ready. I want to show you this way that I get my shape. This is the shape that we're going for.
Okay.
And I don't have to mark anything.
The edges are all turned. That's nice.
Oops,
so it's not going to be raw edged.
No, I'm going to line it up. And when I'm working at home, I'll try and get it straight on the same line of plaid. And
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Because I don't want the eye to get distracted by wiggly.
Okay, so get it right.
Right.
Okay.
Line it up. Okay, so then because this edge is going to be caught in these seams here, I don't need any seam allowance, so I cut it flush. But then I'm just rough cutting about 1/2 of an inch all the way around.
And then cutting right on the paper
right on
there.
Right.
Now, I suppose that this block could be done almost any size.
That's correct.
That you could just decide what your block is and then design this centerpiece to go across it.
Absolutely. That one is a 6-inch block. That's 7.5. I think it would look really good in a 3.5-inch block.
Oh my gosh,
You're
crazy lady.
Yeah, wooka wooka wooka.
Wooka waka waka, yeah.
Okay. Well, as you can see, I've done a lot of these, and I have learned that it takes 4 snips.
Okay, 4 little snips along the curve on each of those.
3 won't do it.
Okay, I'm going to do mine. I'm going to do my 4 snips.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And you don't need to get all the way to the edge, but you need to get fairly close.
Well, and another thing about this, that because this edge is going to get it's going to get somewhat of a disguise because you're going to put the cording along the edge of it.
That's true. You've got a little fudge factor there. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my template as a guide for my ironing, and because I've clipped my seams, it's gonna spread out and follow this curve quite nicely.
So you've now flipped it all over. It's still on the, so the freezer paper's on the right side of the fabric.
It is
if you do have a right or wrong side.
Now see, here's what I have on the front, and I can flip it over and check and see that I'm very accurate with my ironing.
Let me give me a try, okay? Because you've already got one finished, right? Oh, I'm already could tell I'm going to mess up.
No, you're not.
Oh, I am, but I could already.
See, I would have made this is the reason I make my seam allowance fat, so that I have more room with my fingers to turn it and iron.
That's so smart. Okay, so how did I do, teacher?
I think you did just fine, Ricky.
Okay, I think I might have made 5 snips though.
Well, the more snips, the better the curve, but
Okay.
you don't want too many. So to get my nice, beautiful point, there's my point there, and I fold it over like that, and I just hit it.
And continue going around.
And I go around.
Do you typically use a steam or dry?
I don't use steam.
Right.
I use a cheap little discount store iron because I'm so hard on my irons. I drop them all the time, but it works just fine.
Okay.
All right, so
we can keep going around, but let's
Right.
move over to this guy because
Okay.
he's the one that we can use.
but there's one thing I did want to show. This is glue basted in a squeeze bottle. It's very articulate, and just to hold that point, I will put one little dot right there.
And to keep that in place so he doesn't slip out.
Yep.
So you've already done that on this guy. You've put
I
your little
have.
glue in that corner.
So now to get it onto my block,
Now I'm going to move this iron over because I think we're going to be done with him for a moment.
I think we are. So instead of pinning this in place, which I find pinning to distort things, and I don't like sewing over them, so what I do is I take a tiny,
A little bigger drop in. It's in Colorado. We have elevation in.
there you go.
Yeah.
There's like one in each corner, one in the middle. I just dot all the way around like that.
So that glue goes a long way.
Yeah, you
Lasts a
don't
long
need
time.
much. And because of these corners, I can just line them up corner to corner like that. Press it down. Now, if the iron was here, I'd probably.
Do you want to do that?
Yeah.
I can do that.
When you hit this glue with the heat, it helps set the glue really, really quickly. But just so you know, I'm not going to do it here on camera, but if you change your mind and you want a different plaid on there, you can just peel it right off.
Yeah, because it's a little bit of glue, not a lot.
Right. So there you are, ready to sew. It's pretty accurate.
Okay, so when you say you're ready to sew, you mean sew the blocks together, or you're
No.
ready to do some decorative stitch or whatever?
The next step actually is to take a clear zigzag thread and applique this down.
Okay, all right.
And I have that, I believe, you can see it's been done here. I mean, it's such a great stitch, and clear thread, you can't even see it, but that has been sewn down.
All right.
There's the back.
All right, now tell me about the couching part of that.
Okay, now this part I love because I love to play with color, and to me, this needs some pop. So what I do, and I don't plan my colors ahead of time, wow, Colorado.
I'm telling you, it's Colorado elevation, yep.
I just run a little, just a little right along the edge like that. And then how does yellow sound?
Yellow sounds great.
All right, so then I take this and I just kind of finger press it.
And it snugs right up next to that, I'm going to call it a curb.
A curb.
Yeah, it's just sticking right there.
Now this corner, I just kind of use my thumb, and the only place it wants to pull out is on that, is that concave or convex?
Look at that. Yeah.
So that's in place.
That's fabulous.
And then again, I'll go back over and sew it with the clear zigzag.
And then that stays, and that's couched. Basically, you do it on
couched.
both sides.
But I like this thread because it's dense. If you're sewing over it, it won't kind of smush. It gives you a very clean
Great.
line.
Well, I know that there is more to learn. As a matter of fact, Allie, she's got some stitches that she's going to show us. We're going to do that after the break. I hope you're having a great time because I know I am.
Thank you.
Right? Okay, we'll see you right after this. Fabulous.
All right.
Yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. Allie, I was amazed that this was just glued into place and then, zigzagged over, right?
That's right.
But the thing with the quilt behind us, which of course is this, is it's all kind of nailed together with this stitch that's going around.
It's the herringbone stitch, and it's the only stitch I use in that quilt, but I use lots of different kinds of threads to add interest. The stitch holds it together, and the threads give it lots of different color and texture and surfaces. So what I wanted to show is how you can take a regular 6-strand floss.
That's all 6?
This is 6, but I've doubled it here because
12?
I've doubled it to 12 because it gives me a much more graphic looking stitch. It really shows up. It's thick. It's easy to use.
Wow.
And one tip, I didn't learn this for 30 years of embroidery, but when you get floss like this, pull the end off the number side, and it won't ball up inside your...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, now see, I just learned that recently. So that, you gotta know that.
And this is a DMC. It looks hand-dyed.
It's not. It's
Really?
an ombre dyed. I've actually been to their factory and I've seen how they do it in France. Yeah. So it looks hand-dyed, but they figured out how to
Nice. Okay, the number. I just learned that too. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
Now, this silk ribbon here is beautiful, and your friend makes it.
Yes, my friend Vicki Day, VickiDaySilkRibbons.com, or just Google Vicki Day Designs. She hand dyes this beautiful ribbon in her own secret way, and I just can't get enough of it. I love it. What she uses for her base is ribbon from River Silks, and River Silks I also use all the time. And what's great about River Silks is that it has a higher thread count than any other silk ribbon out there, so it doesn't ladder on you. It holds up while you're stitching. You can use a longer thread and it won't.
What does ladder mean?
Ladder means like if you've got a run in your stocking, silk ribbon will do that too.
Oh, really?
If you handle it too much.
Oh, okay.
And that's why they say only use 12 inches or 18 inches, but with this stuff you can use longer.
Okay, so what about threading it?
Okay, I'm going to show you how I thread it. You use a chenille needle with a long eye. A number 18 is what I use. You put it through and then you pierce the end with your thumb, like that, and you just pull. And it's locked on there.
Okay.
You want to see it again?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you mind?
No. And the reason it works is because this ribbon collapses and you can still pull the eye through the fabric.
Okay, so you're going to stick it through the eye.
You stick it through the eye. And
Okay, now slow down on this.
Okay.
Okay.
Here's the tip. I'm just piercing it like that, and then I'm pulling it like that.
Oh my gosh.
And what that does is when you're stitching, you're not constantly unthreading your needle.
Okay.
And then
Two things I've learned in the last 30 seconds.
Okay. And then to do the back, instead of having a big old knot on the back, you do the same thing.
Oh, wow.
You just lock it.
Okay, audience. What do you think? Yeah.
So I'm locked, I'm ready to go, and I want to show you what a beautiful effect you get with silk ribbon. The trick with silk ribbon is not to pull it too tight, because then you'll lose the loft. So it's the same stitch. Now see how it's all twisty like that? What you do is you use your needle as a laying tool, and for some magical reason, all the twists get pulled to the back, and you pull it.
Oh my gosh.
And down you
Okay,
go.
do that again, please.
I will do it again.
And I may pull your finger out of the way, so don't be alarmed.
I won't.
Okay.
So I'm pulling it, and I'm pulling it out like that.
Perfect.
Like that, and then kind of putting a little tension on it. But you don't want to pull it too tight, or you'll lose that beautiful loft.
Perfect.
There you go. And because this ribbon is so beautifully variegated, it stitches up just so unusual.
So the thing I want to tell everyone at home is that you do beautiful handwork. I mean, we're looking at it now, but you do have a little secret weapon.
I do, and it's my Bernina sewing machine.
Okay, so let's talk about this here. Can you peek over and point?
I can.
Okay.
What I learned in order to speed things up is that I can combine machine embroidery stitches with hand stitches. And what that does is it cuts my time in half, and it gives me very nice, even spacing. Spacing's always an issue with handwork stitching. Now, I will say that I use the simplest stitches on my machine. You don't want real intricate ones if you're going to use heavy thread, because they get all balled up, you know, with all the needle passes of the needle.
So what's machine and what's hand?
Everything on here in dark green is by machine. And it's a number 12 thread, and lots of people make it. Aurifil, Sulky, Wonderfil. Weeks Dye Works has a nice number 12.
So in here's the bones, and then you just go and add that by hand.
By hand. And one of the tricks is if you use the same weight of thread in your hand work, also a number 12, as the machine work.
Look at that.
the eye gets fooled. It all looks like it's done by hand.
Wait a minute, that's not by machine, is it?
That's a stepped buttonhole by machine.
Wait, this one here?
Yeah.
But even with that little doodah?
The little doodah is the hand part. That's
okay.
That's a French knot. That's a French knot. Right. And you know, you can thread it, or you know, the stitches that I've added are really quite simple, but it's just putting them together that's the trick.
Okay, now here's another really great idea for interest. You actually will paint some of your stitches.
I will. On the inside, like if you can see these little stars or these holes,
Okay.
which I think these are really cool.
Very cute.
What you can do, and Alex and I are going to do it, is this is golden inner, it's just acrylic paint. Okay, I shook it up, and we have really fine little brushes. We're just gonna dip our little brush in like that, and we're just gonna paint inside the stitching. And your eye just doesn't know what to do with this. It's like, how did she do that? Is it satin stitched? Or she didn't applique something that small, did she? And all you've done is you've just painted.
You've cheated in the most wonderful way possible.
Absolutely. Now, I find that if you match the paint to the thread, you don't have to be as totally careful. Like if I was using red paint inside blue thread, if I got red paint on my blue thread, my illusion would be lost.
Okay.
So there you go.
Okay.
Isn't that awesome?
It's totally awesome.
Right.
So let's take a look. I want to show everybody this, because this is the painting in this is where it all started. But oh no, wait, there's more, right?
Oh wait, there's more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So here, you just have your little stitch that you got on your sewing machine. Do you mind if I show off?
Please
No,
do.
you do it. You do it.
No, it's fine. Go.
Okay, so look at this, everybody. I'm just loving it. Okay, so here, naked.
Naked.
And then we go here, paint. Oh, let's add some stitches. Oh, but wait, what about the beading?
Let's add some beads too.
So let's go from the top of the stars. You've painted, you've beaded. Look at that.
Yeah. I think my favorite row might be this one.
Oh yeah, tell us about that.
Because it's just got that simple leaf stitch. All machines have them. It doesn't matter how fancy or unfancy. It's a really basic embroidery stitch.
Wait, you mean this one here,
This
right?
one here.
Okay.
And at first I've painted it, then I've added a little fly stitch.
By hand.
And then some little glass bead flowers. And I think it's quite effective, and it was really pretty easy.
But wait,
But
there's
wait,
more.
There's more.
So tell us about this.
What's fun about this is all the stitching, which is all red on this sample, is done by machine. But I have used the patterns in the machine stitching to help me space my beading. So with just a little bit of beadwork, and you're just like sewing them on individually, there's nothing, no fancy peyote stitch or anything like that. You're just sewing them on.
So look at this.
According to the pattern of the stitches. And it really transforms them.
I would never have guessed in a million years it was by machine. Look at just
There
that
you go.
little bead there.
And again, I think that's that number 12 thread. The heavier thread you can get away with, the more of the hand illusion you'll get.
Goodness gracious. And I have to say, these are all the step outs from your book.
They are.
We'll talk
They
about those in a little
absolutely
bit.
are.
Okay, as far as beading goes, what do you want to say about that?
Oh, well, there was a couple things I wanted to show you. One, where's that circle?
Oh yeah, this is great.
If you don't want to sew in a straight line, and say you want to mark a circle, either for handwork or around machine, you've got to know this trick. It was taught to me by Lisa Carroll, who lives in Iowa, and this is a plastic canvas base that you can get at any craft store, 10 for $1.
What's it used for?
People stitch in them. They
Okay,
use
gotcha.
them kind of like needlepoint. And so if I want to get a circle marked, in these holes I'll take my disappearing marker and I just go around.
Do you want to travel and teach? Because I have the feeling people would love to take your workshop.
You know, when I do teach, they love this, which is why I wanted to show you. I wish it had a center hole. It doesn't, so I marked the 4 closest in the center.
Look at that. Perfect.
There you go.
Perfect.
So take this one home with you. It's worth the price of admission.
There.
Okay, so beading. The basics for beading that I would want to tell beginners is it's good to have a beading cloth. I use an old piece of suede. I've used it for years and it shows. But that way your beads they don't roll around on you. Sometimes I'll have this on a nice china plate. But you need a surface. And then please don't use your 50 weight machine thread to sew on beads. Just please don't do it. Go to a bead store, get some real beading thread. It's like $1.50 for a spool. It comes in different weights.
It's called beading thread?
This is called NYMO, I believe, NYMO. But if you feel it, it's very strong.
Well, what section of the store would it be in? It wouldn't be with the thread, would it?
In a quilt store, that might be a little more specialized.
Okay.
Might be, unless they carry some embellishment stuff.
Okay.
And then you want to get just a needle that will go through the whole of your bead, and those are often called milliner or straw needles because the eye doesn't stick out from the shaft. So if I was going to tell you the most important things, use the good thread, please.
Okay, and so bottom line is you do the stitches on your machine.
Right.
Then you can choose to paint and or stitch embellish. And then the last thing you would do would be the beading.
Right, because if you do the beading first and then you add stitching, your stitching thread is getting caught on your bead.
Exactly. Probably only have to do that once, right?
Yeah, well, one time 100. No.
Yeah, or 10 times if you're me, what can I say?
Yeah.
Okay, so here are two of your books.
Right.
So tell us about this one.
Okay, that was my first one, and that was basically how I crazy quilt. There's 4 ways of piecing. There's all my floral embellishments. There's some hand stitching, not a lot. There's projects that take you through these skills,
the whole thing
that you learn at the beginning. Whereas this book, which I co-wrote with my lovely friend Valerie Bothall, she does meticulously gorgeous handwork, and there's a whole chapter of pictures that show how to do hand stitching that she put in that book, and it's Bothell, not Bothell. So anyway, in that book, Val and I collaborated, and we wanted to combine some crazy quilt elements with traditional quilt elements.
Nice.
So that people who didn't want to go totally nuts crazy could incorporate it, like this quilt that we had on the show.
You know the crazy thing, Allie's been quilting forever, and sewing forever, but really you've just been on the professional circuit since 09?
Since 09.
Well, you are a mighty fine teacher, lady.
Why, thank you very much. I
Mighty
appreciate
fine.
that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, and thank you for
and making
having
us
me.
go crazy.
Wooka, wooka, wooka.
Exactly. Hey, listen, the TQS cameras went to the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and we caught up with Barbara Cline. You are going to love her work. Stick around.
I am Barbara Cline. I am a quilt teacher, author, and designer from Virginia. My quilt designs are very traditional, but they have a lot of twist to them and some zip and zang that add some flair and make them a little more poppy. Most people, when they see my quilts, their mouths just kind of drop open and say, well, how did you piece that together? I probably have pieced over 300 quilts in my lifetime. I love making star quilts because you can do so much with them. And I just enjoy the creativity of making the stars. My quilt Star Shuffle is one of those quilts that as I created it, it got more exciting and more exciting. And this particular quilt has an overlay on half the star. It makes the star look like there is dimension into the star, so it pops out and gives depth to the quilt. My quilt, Dazzling Daisies, is a quilt that it challenged me in my making. I started making these fan daisies, and they were created overlapping. And my first pattern that I ever made was overlapping stars, and I thought, well, if I can do that to stars, let's do it to daisies. I'll use an overlay, which is often tulle, and I'll use black, white, gray, and this overlay makes the value darker. And so what that did was give them fans depth, so they go in and out, in and out. Surprise Package is a quilt that is a 1-block quilt, and I'm so excited about it because this 1 block, when you change the different pieces, you can come up with circles, diamonds, pinwheels, boxes, and cubes. And so Surprise Package has the cubes in it. And by just playing with them values and colors, it creates a whole nother picture. But you also have stars in these surprise packages. I have written 4 books. Surprise Packages is in my latest book, Amazingly Simple Triangle Stars. I live in the heart of the Shenandoah Valley, and my husband and I have 5 children, and 6 weeks out of the year they are 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28, but that's the way we planned it. My husband's a turkey farmer, so I get to help him in the turkey house. And do I like turkey? It's not my favorite meat. I would rather eat chicken. With having 5 children, sewing has been a nice outlet. My parents owned a fabric store. They bought a store when I was in 5th grade, and that is when my love of quilting began. And I learned how to hand quilt when I was a young girl from my grandmother. The studio I work in is not a studio as such. It's just a room in our house that the children walk through. My design wall is the floor, and even as the children were younger, if they walked over my quilt, it was okay because I want to be with my family. I am a Christian, but my denomination is Mennonite, and I wear the prayer veiling because I believe in the Word of God, the Bible, and so I wear my covering all the time because I want to be in a season of prayer whenever I need to pray. So prayer is a part of my life throughout the day. My sisters and I get together along with my one sister-in-law. There's 7 of us girls and 1 sister-in-law, and we get together once a year for a sewing retreat. And it started out for about 3 days, but now it's 10 days. And we each bring our sewing machines in and we sew on our own projects. I get a lot of challenges and feedback from them. It makes me very excited when I see people come up to me and say, you mean I can do that? And I'm like, yeah. It's just, you break down that block or triangle or square and you can piece it right on your sewing machine, and it's easy. While I have you here in my home today, I'm going to show you how to cut templates and then how to cut your fabric from the templates. And for my sample today, I'm going to be making this triangle block, and you can see it in the quilt behind me. Here is the triangle block, and it's only with this triangle block that this whole quilt is made, and you can see that the pieces are just rotated and pieced in strips. So the supplies that you're going to need is some spray starch, double-sided tape, some self-adhesive laminate sheets, and this is what I really have enjoyed. It's a new product. I used to use template plastic, but I'm moving more to these self-adhesive sheets, a copy of your pattern, and your fabric and scissors. So the first thing we're going to do is roughly cut out our pattern. And you want to cut about 1/2 to 1/4 inch around your pattern. And then you're going to get your laminate sheet, and this here has a clear coating that is going to go on top of your plastic. If I can get this started here, there we go. So what you want to do is place this on top of your pattern, and often if you just get a smaller piece and pull it off, it works a little nicer. And then when you get your scissors, you are going to cut off the black line. Because when we measure with our ruler, when we go to cut it out, we're not using the black line as our measuring guide. We're going to be using the 1/4 inch line that is on the template. We cut this off. And now we're going to cut a strip of fabric that is the width of this template, and we want to go with perpendicular to the grain line of this particular pattern, and we're going to measure, and it's 3 1/4. You want to go a little bigger than the template if it's 1/8 of an inch, so turn it into quarters. And we're going to cut a 3 1/4 inch strip. And from this strip, we're going to cut from the template. Now, if you notice here, we have the grain line fabric. We place our pattern on top. And I always like to use a smaller ruler to do this next step, just because it's easier to twist and turn around. Now, the double-sided tape is what we want to use on the back side of the template, and this is just so it don't slide around on your strip that you cut. And now we're going to use the 1/4 inch line on the ruler. That's what I'm going to be looking at, along with this 1/4 inch line on the template. So I'm not looking at the edge of the template and placing it down and cutting. And I like to pull the piece of fabric away so that I don't make the next cut in there. And notice how the template stays in place. And I'm cutting again on that 1/4 inch line and a 1/4 inch, matching up the 1/4 inch line again. The next piece then, you would just rotate it and turn it around and continue on throughout your strip. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to show you how to piece the block. And if you look here, you can see here is the block, and we're going to be putting this strip onto this one. Now, as we sew along, I want you to take note that we'll be making a 1/4 inch line, and you can push this up this way or this way, but we basically want to center it. And when we center it, when we make a 1/4 inch line, our stitching is going to be right in this V, and when we end, it's going to be right in the V. If you're making a 1/4 inch and it's not in that V, then it's not placed quite right. Through the magic of television, I'm now at my sewing machine. So we are ready to piece the triangle block. I'm going to be piecing this strip to the ice cream cone shape, and notice here again my placement so that the 1/4 inch is in that little V. And I like to sew on the little tabs. They save thread. And today I'm just going to finger press because of time. Now I'm going to be putting the second piece on, and here again you have the little V at the beginning and at the end. Lining up my little V at the end so that when I make the 1/4 inch seam, it's going to hit the V. Finger press again, and when I get done, I'll cut off all them little triangles that are at the edge. We're ready for this triangle to go onto the piece, watching the little V again. And you can see that this block doesn't take very long at all to piece. And when you do assembly line and do hundreds of them, you just keep sewing away and going to town. And the last piece will go on here and placing it on the white strip, lining up the V again. And ta-da! We have a triangle block, and when pressed, it's a nice triangle block. I invite you to try this in your home. My website is www.delightfulpiecing.com.
Alex, I love visual impact in quilts. It's one of the things that really gets me. And now I have a word for it. Zip and zang. That's what I'm looking for.
Exactly. Hey, everyone who's watching this, what you don't know, from a female's point of view, is that the day after the cameras were there, Barbara's daughter was getting married. And in between takes, they were running out and cutting flowers for the whole thing. Barbara, thank you so much. From one mother who has put on a wedding to another.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I'll tell you, you live in a beautiful place. I hope that I get to come visit there because I would just love to have a day of rest. So thank you again for all of that. It was fabulous.
And Allie, I just love what you brought to the table today. Literally, all those little tips, and I know we've just scratched the surface with you.
It was crazy. Hey, everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you had a crazy and fun day, too. And remember, it's a new day every day. You don't want to miss the after set of today's show right after the credits. So Allie, you're a gardener, and many quilters are gardeners, but I also understand your husband is a gardener. So tell us about that relationship.
Okay, his and hers. The only thing we fight over is compost. No, actually, we have very different styles. My husband was classically trained by a master horticulturalist from England named Alan Chadwick, and is very much into growing a lot of food as productive as he can, and so he uses a level on the posts and lines and rulers to lay out his beds.
You're kidding.
It's all very methodical.
Oh yes. And what results? Whereas me, I put my flowers together like my crazy quilts. I just kind of feel what's going to go and how it's going to turn out. And so we have separate gardens because my style would drive him nuts, and his style I wouldn't be interested in. He lets me weed.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I bet he does.
How close together are these gardens?
Yeah.
Are they?
They're just across the driveway. We can see each other. We can text each other from the garden.
How big is your acreage? Or I mean, it's big, right?
Our house is on 11 acres, but I would say our gardens are about 1 between his and mine.
And what do you do about deer and all that?
Oh, fenced.
Okay.
Without
okay.
a fence, there's no garden.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm back to this whole his and hers thing, and you're talking about how his is so structured with the levels and all of that.
I know, look at this piece here.
I mean, I've looked at your quilts today, and I have to believe, of course, your garden, while it may look a bit more chaotic, I'm telling you, every decision that I saw in your quilt is still a decision that you're making. You're both making decisions, you're just doing it differently.
That's correct. That's correct. And I do really think about color combinations when I'm planting, and color saturation and heights. And so, yeah, I guess it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And the view from your sewing room, what garden do you look at?
I look out at the Washougal River Valley. There's no garden. It's space. Receding plains and weather. And
with all this intricate work, what do you do?
You know, I think about what I'm doing, and if I'm really lucky, I'm not thinking at all. I'm just doing.
In quiet.
And then I look up and I've got a beautiful view.
Wonderful.
So it's a pretty quiet life, but then I'll leave the Ponderosa and I'll get to come and meet people like you. So I have a balance.
I understand.
Hey, thanks so much for coming.
And thank you.
Beautiful and good tricks. Love your tricks.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.